to the conversion process in Judaism. And Rabbi Tradberg, this is for you. Why is the Orthodox conversion process is so difficult and demanding?
Thanks. Well, it is. It actually is. The principle that we function under for Orthodox conversion is that a person needs to accept the mitzvot and accept that they will live according to the mitzvot. There are some Orthodox rabbis that don't necessarily demand that the person be fully observant, but the vast majority of Orthodox conversions in the world today require one to be, by the time you get to the conversion, to be keeping Shabbat in a strictly Orthodox manner, meaning you don't travel on Shabbat, you don't use electricity, you attend synagogue, to keep the holidays, to keep kosher, to have daily prayer, to make blessings over food. And that's expected of the person by the Bet Din when they come for their final meeting. And that's based on the principle that we believe that conversion is an acceptance of the Torah in its entirety. And the acceptance of the Torah means that we feel, as I said before, we bend our will and observe everything that the Torah said. So what that means is that you have to study to know what to do. You have to study the laws of Shabbat. You have to study the laws of prayer. You have to start to do it, and you have to observe Shabbat over a period of time so that you know what you're doing. So that's the process. At one level, it's very demanding. At another level, it's certainly doable. People can do it. There's an assertion of will. So that's the problem. That's the process that is demanded in Orthodox conversion.
So why can't I just take upon myself all the mitzvot? Okay, I will study like for 2-3 months. I'll take upon myself the mitzvot and then to convert. Why it had to take like more over a year?
So there is no set amount of time that it takes, especially here in Israel. When people come to me for the first call, sometimes the people are not aware of observance at all, and sometimes people have been observing mitzvot for 20 years, and yet we're nervous about making that last step. In which case, when they go to the Bet Din, they accept them at their first meeting. It doesn't take any time at all. So it's all a function of, there's a lot to learn. The daily prayers, you have to know what to say and what they mean, and you have to know the blessings on the food, and you have to know the process of getting ready for Passover and getting the matzah and all the mitzvot. There's a lot to learn. The rabbinate here in Israel requires a course of 400 hours. That's a lot. So our course is 6 hours a week over a year. So it's a lot of hours of study and commitment. So in theory, a person can come and convert in 2 months if they commit themselves to mitzvot. But in reality, there's a lot to learn, and so it takes more time.
Thank you.
Can I jump in, Noah?
Sure.
Rabbi Tradberg, that's wonderful. I'm amazed that you have people with that level of commitment. That's great. I think that's wonderful. So to go back to what I said earlier about how there are sources within the Talmud for more flexibility, right? There's when you look at the Talmud about what conversion is, they don't know what Jewish life is, right? Hillel converts somebody who wants to become the high priest. He says, sure, he converts him. And then he studies and the guy realizes, oh, I won't get to be the high priest. So the guy clearly doesn't know the first thing about it. And apparently, I got this from a student of Reb Moshe Feinstein. I haven't read it in his tshuva, but I got this from his student. Reb Moshe Feinstein held that you have to know some amount, right? You have to know some mitzvot. You're not expected to know every detail yet. You're not expected to necessarily follow every detail yet. You're just required to know a little bit and accept in principle that I'm following Torah as interpreted by the rabbis. So that's the standard I use. I'm guessing, Rabbi Tradberg, when you referred to those other rabbis, I'm guessing that's kind of standard they used. So, to me, that's the standard I hold by. Although I admire you and your students. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I think to go back to the Talmud and to see what was in the Talmud is interesting in the discussion about conversion. We rely on modern authorities, and the modern authorities, advocate that a person has to keep all of the mitzvot. And one of the issues that I was just going to mention is that there is a view that if a person is converted to Judaism and then does not keep the mitzvot, that the Bet Din violates what's called lifnei iver lo titen mishal, that you've put a stumbling block in front of the blind. In other words, you've brought a person to Judaism, but then you've really been unfair to them because you didn't teach them all of the mitzvot, and now they stumble, and you've caused that. So there is a sense of responsibility to the Bet Din to kind of ensure that the person is going to be loyal to the mitzvot and keep the mitzvot. Otherwise, they feel personally responsible for something which is to their detriment.
If I could add to this, I'm going to have to side with Rabbi Sif on this one, and I think this is another example of nuance within Orthodoxy. The conversion process as it's done today is so detached from the Talmudic ideal, from the Mishnaic ideal, even from the ideal laid down by the Rishonim. I don't think anyone who could pick up Yeridea and Shulchan Aruch or like a Sirabia and the Rambam and read it halacha by halacha or siman by siman could ever conclude that what's done now in the Orthodox world is actually what our sages thought the halachic process of conversion should look like. And I know it's a hard task the Rabbanut has, as well as the RCA preparing candidates for conversion, to in some way marry two ideas, the halachic ideal with the modern state of Israel. It's definitely a hard task. Like, I don't really accept the notion that we in some way fold to modernity, that modern rabbis have a say, or then why are we any different than Reform? Why are we any different from conservative? The Orthodox standard is that the halacha doesn't change. The halacha never changes. So it's essentially true. In Masechet Shabbat, it says a Hillel converted someone in one day. The halacha is pretty clear cut. From Masechet Yevamot, Hilchot Sirabia, Yeridea, they all quote each other, and it's essentially the same procedure. Somebody comes to convert, it never literally says they have to be completely makabel. That means they have to necessarily accept the commands. Why? Because there's a principle laid down in Jewish law of goyos b'torah chayv misa that you're not supposed to teach someone who's not already Jewish all our Torah laws, right? I mean, the Rambam, I think, lays this down more because they might be able to use it against you. So if they learn anything, they learn it with us, and we only have a real obligation to teach them anything once they actually enter the Jewish community. So it seems that the practice was to convert them somewhat immediately. I mean, the Rambam lays down some principles, the basics of Avodah Zarah, the gleanings of the field, and if they accept it, he says that you accept them, miyad. And then it says that you teach him all this again when he's already in the water. So for sure, there's a huge disconnect between what appears in the Talmud, what appears in the Halacha by Rishonim, and what's actually done today. Not that I don't think anyone today is in any way excluding any of these parameters, but it seems that in this area, they've focused on doing things l'chumra, from a stringent perspective. What makes it a slippery slope is that we have a mitzvah, v'aftem et ger, a ger lo tone, of not mistreating the convert to the point that what we shouldn't do is make it so difficult that people would not want to convert. According to Rav Sadagon, and this also applies, mistreating converts also applies to people who are in the process or who are interested in converting. For sure, it's a difficult balance, but the Rabbanut, in some way being married to the Medina, made it a more difficult process, to the point that I would say that more people make aliyah, like via the Sochnut, like not the Rabbanut, by converting Reform and Conservative, than converting Orthodox, because the Rabbanut has made it so difficult. And I think it was Rabbi Shlomo Goren who started the practice of nullifying conversions. I don't even know if Reform and Conservative does that. But could there have been a bigger step to make us look, one, primitive, and two, less halachic than that? When I was living in Eretz Yisrael, there was this member of the Rabbanut that they invalidated, I think, 5,000 conversions in one day. Completely absurd, only making us look worse. So I think that the closer we get to the actual source text, the more lenient the process actually becomes, not the more stringent. So it seems like nowadays we've become overly stringent while other streams of Judaism have become overly lenient. And I think the goal is to remain within the halachic framework, which is essentially what appears in Shulchan Aruch.
Noah, do you want me to respond or you want to go on to the other questions?
I think we will go on because we don't have much time.